Hello and welcome back to Everything Swords. Today we have the Kora. If I say Kora, some of you might think of that silly little show that no one knows about. But no, I'm talking about the Nepalese Kora. This forward-angled blade is a weapon originating from Nepal from the 10th century. Although it wasn't the only one of its kind, similar weapons were found in India, the Karga and the Jamarteg. I butchered that so hard, I'm so sorry. The weapon was commonly used in both military and ceremonial purposes, though both versions were slightly different, with the ceremonial swords being wider and heavier. The military version was lighter because the soldiers needed to be able to wield it. This weapon was heavy and awkward, one to use only if you trained for it. The best example for this were the Gurkhas. The Gurkhas were an army of Nepalese and North Indian warriors that fought using the Kora as their primary weapon. In 1814 to 1816, the British East India Company fought a war against the powerful city-state of Gurkha, in what is now known as Western Nepal. Although victorious, the British were greatly impressed by the fighting qualities of the Gurkha, especially since the British had muskets while the Gurkhas only had the Kora at their disposal. Eventually, after years of fighting, they signed a peace treaty and the British Army enrolled a large quantity of the Gurkhas, and over the years they distinguished themselves as among the finest in the army. They became so integrated into the army that they fought in many of the British wars, including World War I, World War II, the Sikh Wars, the Indian Mutiny, the Indonesian Confrontation, the Falkland Wars, the Gulf War. There's many more, but I can't be asked to mention them. But even after so many years of training, tradition and fighting, the Kora was swapped out for firearms, while the second most iconic Nepalese weapon was kept, which was the kukri. The Kora was then only used for ceremonial purposes, and is still used as a sacrificial weapon against bullocks. The cattle. The Kora itself was around 46 to 71 centimeters of steel, with the inside edge of the blade being the sharp edge. As you can see at the tip of the sword, it's drastically flared. This is intentional as it adds weight to the sword. For an inexperienced user, this can be seen as a disadvantage, but in fact it adds so much more power to the swing. If enough momentum is generated with this weapon, it becomes unbelievably powerful. Powerful enough to penetrate light armor. Even this guy, Lord Edgerton of Tatton, says that those who use it skillfully are enabled to cut a sheep in two at a single blow. However, this sword was very useless in terms of piercing. Slashing it could handle masterfully, but it could not pierce. What surprised me though, when researching this, was that this was a one-handed weapon. You could not physically use it as a two-handed weapon, as there was not enough space for the grip, for your hand on the grip. What makes it even more surprising to think about how a one-handed weapon could cut a sheep in half. Oh, yeah, also it had a guarded hilt with overlaid oval discs, the pommel with a final formed of diminishing flattened spheres. But the way of fighting using this sword was to use gravity and momentum as your ally. The most common type of strike was either the overhead strike or over-the-shoulder strike. It is important to note that since this is a one-handed weapon, it was most often used with a shield. The main point when fighting with swords is to use all parts of the sword to your advantage. So if your opponent has a shield, you can swing using the back edge of your blade and effectively turn your sword into a mace. If you do this, you probably won't break the shield, but you will thoroughly mess up your opponent's shield arm. You could also use the curve to reach around things like shields or swords, or even just more effectively blow it, since the blade could simply not slide off. Yet even for experienced fighters, doing sideward swing was always annoying due to the flared bit at the end and the fact that your grip was round. This is what confuses me most about this weapon, is that the grip is round. If it's round, your grip will eventually slip and the sword won't be facing the correct direction. Whereas if it was rectangular, or even just oval, or even still just two-handed, your grip would be so much more stable. But, so, yeah, sideways swing, annoying because flared tip, round grip, and curvature makes the sword droop down, if held horizontally. This weapon was also one that could be one of the most lethal. If you're caught unaware, chances are you would die. But, as I mentioned before, this weapon is hard to master, and if you want to know how to properly wield it, it needs to be the central focus of your training. To make a Kora, you need to take a long bar of metal and start lengthening it to the desired size. While lengthening the bar, do not do anything to the tip. Once the bar is at its desired length, start hammering the sword to give it the bent look, and make sure to mark where the tang will be, and don't touch it. It should be able to reach the end of the grip. The bar should now look more or less like a shoddy bent mace. Flatten the tip, now. The reason we wanted the tip to stay thick at the beginning was so once it's hammered now, it can give it that flared aspect and add the extra weight. Hammer until the shape looks as desired and sharpen the inward curved edge. Make a handle out of wood or metal to preference with a space for the tang to fit in. Create a handguard and a pommel. Puncture a hole in the middle of the grip and puncture a hole in the tang so that it is at the same level as the hole in the grip. Align the holes and insert a metal rod the size of the hole inside and fuse it to the tang. Sand down the metal and you're done. It is once again time for my opinion, which nobody asked for. I would give this weapon a solid 6 out of 10. It's a very powerful weapon with some annoying aspects. Round grip. But it requires you to train and master it over many years to properly use it. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you staying this long. Bye.